Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get into something that I think a lot of us have experienced at one point or another, dealing with commitment in relationships, or really, I guess, the lack of commitment, and trying to understand why some people just can't seem to take that leap.
Yeah,
So we're going to try to figure that out today.
right.
The source material that we're using for this deep dive is a podcast episode called The Uncommittables When They're Just Not Ready from the relationship advice podcast, Love Dilemmas.
Okay.
So hopefully after this deep dive, the base will walk away with a little bit better of an understanding and, maybe even some actionable advice for how to deal with this whole dating dilemma.
Right. And it's so interesting how this topic brings up a lot of feelings of confusion and inadequacy in the person who's on the receiving end of this avoidant behavior.
Right.
And it's important for them to remember that these are normal reactions, and it's not that they're not enough. It's just, it's about understanding the complexities of commitment itself.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it can be really confusing when you think things are going great and then the person you're seeing starts to pull back.
Yeah.
And, leaves you wondering, like, what went wrong.
Exactly.
And the Love Dilemmas hosts, they really dived into some of the common reasons why this might be happening.
Okay.
And one thing that they said, which, kind of makes sense, is that past relationship trauma can play a huge role in this,
Uh-huh.
especially if someone's gone through something like infidelity or, being abandoned in a previous relationship,
Right.
that those kinds of experiences can create so much anxiety about being vulnerable and about trusting someone again.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not even just about being hurt. It's about the way that that hurt can kind of shape a person's worldview, and they create this defense mechanism against being hurt again.
Right. It's like a self-preservation thing.
Exactly. And the podcast hosts, they used a phrase I thought was really interesting. They called it emotional baggage.
Yeah.
And they weren't trying to be, mean about it, but it was more about acknowledging that those past experiences can really weigh someone down and prevent them from fully, engaging in new relationships.
So it's almost like it's not even necessarily a conscious choice to be avoidant, but it's like this subconscious response
Exactly.
to kind of protect themselves.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. But then they also talked about how societal pressures can be a factor as well,
Uh-huh.
especially the way that we put so much emphasis on individual achievement and career success.
Right.
Like almost as if relationships are getting in the way of, self-actualization. I mean,
Yeah.
isn't that a little bit of a cop-out, though?
Well, I understand your skepticism.
It's like, I'm too busy conquering the world to, bother with love.
Right, right. And it is true sometimes that this can be an excuse that's masking some deeper insecurities.
Right.
But the podcast hosts presented this really interesting perspective on it.
Okay.
They were suggesting that it can tie into attachment styles,
Okay.
specifically individuals with an avoidant attachment style. And this often develops in early childhood.
Uh-huh.
They prioritize independence, and then they struggle with the interdependency that comes with a committed relationship.
Oh, so it's like their aversion to commitment isn't necessarily personal. It's like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
almost like a deeply ingrained pattern of behavior stemming from their attachment style.
Yeah, that's a very helpful way to reframe it.
Okay.
It doesn't excuse the behavior, but it gives you a little more insight as to the why behind it.
Right. Okay, so that makes sense. So then let's say you are dating someone and you're seeing all these classic signs of commitment aversion. What do you do?
Right.
Love Dilemma's host. They actually had some interesting advice about this.
Yeah, they really emphasize the importance of communication,
Okay.
but not in the way that you might expect. Yeah, how people say define the relationship talk.
Right, right. Like, what are we?
Yeah, exactly.
Which can be terrifying.
Right, but they caution against that, and they suggest a more nuanced approach.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
They advocate for having a conversation that's centered around your shared values and long-term goals.
Okay.
So instead of asking, what are we, you could ask, where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Okay.
What's your aspirations for your personal life?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and by focusing on these broader life goals, you're kind of subtly inviting them to consider where a relationship fits into their vision of the future.
Right. And it's not like you're putting them on the spot.
But
You're encouraging them to kind of reflect on their own desires and priorities and whether those align with yours.
Exactly. And in doing so, you're gaining really valuable insight into their mindset without having to directly confront the commitment issue.
Right. Which could totally backfire.
Exactly.
Okay, that's really smart. But what if you have that conversation and you're both on the same page about everything?
Uh-huh.
but they're still hesitant or unsure about, being in a committed relationship.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
Well, the podcast hosts offered this really powerful piece of advice, but it can be a little challenging.
Okay.
They said, believe them. Don't
Oh.
try to convince them otherwise or rationalize their hesitation.
Even if you really see a genuine connection and you feel like they could be the one.
Even then, because you really can't force someone to be ready for something they're not,
Right.
no matter how strong your feelings are.
I mean, that's got to be tough to hear, though, especially when you're, like, really invested.
It absolutely is. And the podcast hosts, they totally acknowledge that it can be painful to let go of that hope that they'll eventually come around.
Right.
But they also stress that clinging to that hope can actually prevent you from moving on
Uh-huh.
and finding someone who is truly ready and excited to build a future with you.
Okay, so then how do you know when it's actually time to walk away, even when it hurts?
Well,
Because that's a really tough question.
it is, and the Love Dilemmas hosts offered a really good framework, I thought, for making that decision. They suggested evaluating the relationship based on this question:
Okay.
is this relationship adding to my life, or is it taking away from it?
Ooh, that's good. I'm writing that one down.
And it forces you to be really honest with yourself about the impact that this relationship is having on your overall well-being.
Uh-huh.
And if you find yourself constantly anxious, constantly questioning your worth or compromising your own needs and values,
Yeah.
it might be a sign that it's doing more harm than good.
So it's not just about, whether or not you love this person. It's about whether the relationship is actually a source of joy and fulfillment, or if
Exactly.
it's like constant stress and heartache.
Exactly. And it's about prioritizing your own emotional well-being
Yeah.
and recognizing that you decide to be in a relationship that nurtures you and uplifts you, not one that's draining and diminishes you.
I think that's a great place to stop for today. I
Great.
feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
We have, and we've just scratched the
Yeah,
surface of this topic.
So stay tuned for part 2, guys, where we're going to delve even deeper into this and talk about strategies for moving on gracefully and how to reframe heartbreak and how to find the love and commitment that you deserve.
It's going to be good.
It is going to be good. So stay tuned.